you might have noticed Miss Grimes is visiting us today. She got very curious about our videos, so we told her she could come hang out with us.
Tell everybody hi.
Hi.
Okay. Miss Grimes, what's your favorite thing in history?
I love Lincoln.
Oh, so you'll learn more about that in 8th grade, but we're going to go way, way back today, and we're going to look at some of the very first civilizations that learned how to farm. And remember we talked about that agriculture is just that big fancy word for farming. So as we follow along, remember that we're in Chapter 3, Lesson 2, and our big idea and why this matters is that the agricultural revolution allowed people to set up permanent settlements. Miss Lewis, before we were in permanent settlements, what were we?
Nomads.
We were nomads. And Miss Hodges, what does that mean if we're nomads?
Well, if you're a nomad, that means you don't have a permanent place to live. You wander around and you try to find yourself a good spot with a lot of food so you can do some hunting and gathering, but you don't have any food that'll last you for a long time.
Remember our gummy bear experiment.
So guys, hang tight. Today we're going to see how that shift happened from the way that we lived before in the Paleolithic or the Old Stone Age to the New Stone Age or the Neolithic, where we figured out how to do that farming. And the revolutionary, key word, revolution, changes that we're going to see with this change. We'll see you soon. Hold on tight, guys.
As humans started to discover how to farm and how to use these technologies, we move into a new period of time called the Neolithic times. Do me a favor and circle the word Neo in your heading right here in your packet where it says Neolithic times. That word Neo means new. Go ahead and write that word new right below there. And then circle that word lithic. If you have two different colors, it's great to color code because it helps you show the differences between the two. But if you don't worry about it. Just circle it with whatever writing utensil you're using. Below lithic, remember that means stone. So when we have Paleolithic, that's our Old Stone Age. But when we have Neolithic, that's our New Stone Age. So even though humans have invented farming during this time, we're still using stone tools. And we still see a lot of the same technology, just starting to be used in a different way. Now, this began about 8,000 BC. Now, this is a great place for us to use that term circa 8,000 BC. And it kind of sprung up all around the world. We don't really know exactly where, or rather we know where, but it happened in a lot of different places all at around the same time. Some a little bit earlier, some a little bit later. And we know that because we start seeing permanent settlements. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. And it lasted until about 4,000 BC. So doing my elapsed time, that's a period of time around 4,000 years. Okay. Now this is one of those dates, that 4,000 BC, that some historians debate a little and say it's either a little bit later or a little bit earlier. So we're going to use that circa or about. So if we look at our timeline here, here's our Old Stone Age, way, way back there. And we see our ice ages right here as people are migrating all around the world, settling down, looking for those resources for them to best use. But the New Stone Age begins, and we have our agricultural revolution right around here in our timeline. And these are all BC, or before Christ. So as we look at these timelines, make sure we know this is more than 10,000 years ago from where we are today. We're talking about huge stretches of time. But this is where we really start seeing people living in a lifestyle a little bit more similar to our own. So we're going to see a lot of similarities coming up very soon. So about 8,000 BC, that's when this last ice age that we talked about in our section 1 notes starts to end. And we have a climate that gradually starts to warm. Those ice caps recede, they pull back, and so they allow more fresh water to be available, and the climate gets a little bit warmer. Because of this, people move into areas with a mild climate and fertile land. Now that word fertile right here, guys, all that means is that it's good for growing crops. That's going to be a word we see again and again as we move through. So make sure that you kind of remember what that word means, and we'll talk about that again. And as we start to move into those areas, people realize this is a great area to find food. And as we start planting wild seeds or seeing that if we throw away a seed from a wild plant, we can grow it again, we start to develop agriculture or farming. And agriculture is just a big fancy way of saying we are going to work together. And specifically, it's systematic agriculture. We have a system for this. It's not just scatter a few seeds here and hope they grow. We actually start to plan out how we're going to farm. And we start to tame animals for human use. And this is a process called domestication. So as, for example, these plants that we see right here. We started off, this is a wheat plant, and the one we see over here, this is what a modern day wheat plant looks like. And all of these little pips, those are the seeds, the grains of wheat. That's what, if you plant them, more wheat grows. Now originally, when our earliest Neolithic ancestors were learning about wheat, this is what it might have looked like, just a few grains. But over time, they saw, well, you know, we might have some plants that have a few more grains, so they're going to plant the seeds from that plant and hope that those plants' babies, or offspring rather, have even more seeds. So over time, humans changed these plants, and we chose the ones that gave us the most grains to be able to produce the most food. And same thing with animals. If we have a dog, for example, or a wolf, let's say, if we have a wolf and it comes kind of near us in order to get food from us and it's friendly and kind, we might choose to keep its friendliest puppies around. And then over many generations, those wolf pups become completely used to being around humans, and we've bred them or tamed them for doing what we need to do, whether it's being sheepdogs or hanging out watching the animals or just kind of being companions. After that, we start to settle down permanently because, hey, we don't have to move anymore. Now, if we can grow all the food we need in one area, we have a constant food supply, and this creates a surplus. So in the archaeological record, we start to see villages where we see permanent settlements all over the world from around this time. We see villages with houses that have foundations made of stone. We see artifacts that show that people have been there for a long time and that they're using the land, they're cultivating it. And because of this, because we have a surplus of food, we have more than we need, we can feed more people. Now, the thing about having a surplus is, like I said, it means that we can feed more people. So because of this, our population grows. Now, guys, here's the thing. This one chart, this is so important, especially these last 3 boxes. Please, please, please circle these last 3 boxes, put some stars by them. You need to know that agriculture leads to a surplus, and a surplus or extra food leads to population growth. This is going to be a pattern that we see again and again throughout this year. Now, I want to show you this map here so we can see some of the different areas where agriculture happened. Now, anywhere between about 5,000 and 500 BC, we start to see. So if I look at my key right here, I see that these red areas, like here, 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 and here, thousands of miles apart, had agriculture by about 5,000 BC, some even earlier than that. By about 2000 BC, or 2,000 years before Christ, we see these yellow areas, okay, all along here. Or I'm sorry, that's by 3000 BC. That's why it's always important to read your key really carefully, because I misread that. The purple is by 2000 BC in these fertile or rich soiled areas, and then the green is by about 500 BC. So by about 500 BC, farming has spread around to most of the world. That's not desert. Those are the big blanks we see right here. Or deep jungle like we see in South America. So we're going to talk more about some of those effects on the next few slides. So hang tight and keep taking your notes, guys.
Okay, so now that you've thought about why people would have big, large, thick walls around their village, let's talk about what life inside of that village might have looked like. Okay, so during the Neolithic age, people began to settle into villages, and these villages were often located next to fields that could be planted. Okay, so we're talking about large fields where we could grow and plant food. Okay, so there was a steady food supply in these villages. Now, with this steady food supply, that also created a growing population. Okay, people had more food, they were healthier. So we started to see more population growth as food resources were more abundant. Now, because we have a ton of food, there was actually more being produced or more being made than people could actually eat. So if there's more food than people could actually eat, that means there's less jobs on the actual farm. So what we found was that people on the farms didn't necessarily need 100 people, working out on the farm. So what they did was they created something called specialization or division of labor. So with specialization, we would see people becoming really big experts in things like tool making, or we would have, people making clothes, things like that. So because we start to see a shift from so many people needing to grow the food on the land, we then have an abundant amount of food that allows people to leave their working on the farm and move towards specialization or becoming specialized in a different job around the village. Okay, so we talk about food supply and population growth in the Neolithic age. Those are big things, and specialization is key. We now see people starting to have jobs outside of things surrounding food.
Okay, so as the Neolithic age comes to an end, the tools that the Neolithic people are using get better and better. Agriculture is getting better. They're starting to have tools that are more substantial, stronger, and they're using them more effectively and more efficiently to make enough food for everybody to live. And they began using another metal called copper. And this copper that they used, if you're looking at your notes, you'll see that they used copper to make tools. And they found that if they could mix copper and tin together, they got a metal that we call bronze, which was stronger than copper. So the tools that they made and the weapons that they made were stronger and much more durable, and they would last longer. And so we moved from the Neolithic age into what's called the Bronze Age. And so it didn't last a whole long time because bronze was pretty expensive and it was hard for people to afford that. But that's the transition from the Neolithic age into the Bronze Age. So we're going to talk about what makes a civilization and how you move from just being a group of people who live together to actually being a civilization on the next slide. But before we go, look it over on the side, look at the pictures that you have. Here's some tools that were made in the Bronze Age, and there's a picture of how they would have made those tools. So make sure your notes are filled in before you go to the next slide, and I'll see you in just a moment.